become aware of it, as parents become aware of it, we're catching a portion of people who used to be missed. ADHD is...
So yeah, this is quite true. I think it's overdiagnosed personally. If I'm going to be brutally honest, I think some people will use it as a leg up, like to get extra support, which I don't like. If you need extra support, then you should get extra support, but sometimes people do use it as an excuse. Like sometimes I've got a friend who has never been diagnosed, but he's ADHD. He keeps telling everyone he's ADHD, but he's just fucking annoying. Like he'll have moments where he's just so irritating, and that's just his personality. Like normally he's fine, but he has days where he pokes the bear. He just tries to wind people up. He's like, oh, I'm having a bad ADHD day. It's like, it doesn't really work like that. Yeah, so I think it's more aware now. At school, I was probably one of 3 or 4 known ADHD kids. There was a couple of guys with dyslexia and a couple of other things as well, but I got put... The frustrating thing, I'll probably talk about it later. I'm not stupid, but I got put in a div kid class because I got bored. So I started off school not very well, getting bullied and basically not engaging, which put me in the bottom tier, which meant that doing things like long division and fractions and stuff, I would work it out in probably an hour, let's say, an hour class. The pupils in my class were what I call the div kids, who just didn't understand how numbers worked, or like in English didn't understand how like sentence structure worked or how to spell or read. And that obviously disengaged me even more, which is the hyper focused, not interested sort of thing. And that's another symptom of it. Is, are they stupid or are they just not interested? And a lot of the time at school, especially with people on the autism spectrum and things like ADHD and stuff like that, I think it's a lot to do with engagement more than anything, rather than intelligence.
Not simply a neuroscientific illness. It's actually a neuroscientific meets environment illness. And this is a big theory that's getting a lot of momentum in psychiatry, which is that mental illnesses don't exist in a vacuum, that they actually require a particular environment to come out. So for example, we also know that like major depressive disorder can manifest in stressful jobs, in stressful relationships.
So yeah, like if you talk about depression, my mom's got depression. I don't talk about it that often, but I try and socialize with her quite a lot. Like I try and get her engaged with stuff, because when she doesn't get her brain moving, she just sinks further and further. And it's the same thing, it's an environment thing. So while I'm living here, I'm trying to engage her in things. So she's doing Sudokus now, so it gets her brain moving. We try and do at least once a week some sort of DIY task, whether it's cleaning out the spare room, going to the tip, that sort of thing. So I know from living on my own that I struggle when I isolate myself, and it's an environment thing, so it makes it worse and worse and worse the more you kind of pull yourself away from regular interactions.
There's one study that actually shows that the student-teacher ratio correlates with the degree of ADHD diagnosis.
And I think this is why I stream. It keeps me engaged. It keeps me kind of relatively social with people. Well, I'm not a massive streamer. I'm not a massive YouTuber, but just the engagement is kind of good for me.
If I have one teacher and 30 students, keeping all of those 30 students on task is very, very difficult. And so if there's a kid who's got an ADHD predisposition, they start to act out more because they don't get as much individualized attention as they need. So as we actually increase the number of teachers to students, students can get more individualized attention. As they get more individualized attention, their ADHD shines through a little bit less.
So I was never given any support at school. I was just dumped in the lower tiers and just kind of told to get on with it. My school, like grade wise and Ofsted wise, is like one of the best in the country for like a public school, state school. But that's because the clever kids, there was a lot of clever kids, and that all the good families and all the wealthy families wanted to go to my school. I didn't go to a private school, just an FYI. It was just a state school, but it was a good school to get into. You had to do entry exams and stuff like that. I luckily was part of the feeder school, so I got an exemption, and I wasn't like dumb, so I got through the tests quite well. But once I was at school, the second the school realised that I was a bit difficult, they just kind of put me in the lower tier, ignore me. And I've got loads of gripes with education in the UK. I honestly do.
So the second reason that ADHD is on the rise is because I actually think there's stresses in our school system. So as it becomes harder to become a teacher, who ultimately suffers? The teacher suffers. And when they suffer, all the kids with ADHD also suffer. Teacher, they've got a little bit less patience to redirect a child. They have a little bit less ability to sit down and sort of help that child practice focus and attention and organization. Reason number 3 why I think ADHD is on the rise is simply because of technology.
Yeah.
So we know that there's a change in technology that is shortening our attention spans.
TikTok.
And we can see this if we look at, generally speaking, the way that content is consumed on the internet. So if you look at, like, originally we had blogs, right? After blogs, we had video essays. After video essays, we had like compilations. We had Vines. Now we have TikToks. So one of the things that's starting to happen is
I was going to say, short form content generally is just brain rot. The media at the moment, stuff that you see on Twitter, that's not factually correct in the slightest. If your brain is all squidgy and you're absorbing stuff, you're going to get brain rot from all this sort of stuff.
Shrinking. And as our attention span shrinks, we sort of move a little bit societally towards ADHD. There are some concerns about things like processed foods and stuff like that. There's also some evidence that as the average age
I think that accounts for any form of health,
rises,
not just
the
mental health.
amount of ADHD may be correlating with that too. So there are some epidemiologic factors. But I'd say like the 3 or 4 major reasons why ADHD is on the rise is, first of all, because we're catching it more. Secondly, because we're shortening our attention spans. And third, because we've actually got a lot of stress on our school system, which means that it's harder to accommodate neuroatypical kids.
Yep, I agree.
Next question is, why is ADHD more common in males? So this is a really good question. So we do know that ADHD is more common in males for sure. What maturity really is frontal lobe development. And we know that boys' frontal lobes tend to develop a little bit slower than girls. So boys tend to be a little bit more impulsive. They tend to be a little bit more wavering in terms of their attention. Sometimes they're like a little bit less conscientious,
you could say that,
especially at early ages.
So just going a little bit off topic, you could say that for the pay gap is men are more impulsive, so they will take more risks, which is more risk reward driven in careers. So they may make a bold decision, whereas women may be a bit more passive, a bit more planned out, let's say. And it's not always necessarily the right thing to do. Sometimes it will obviously backfire as well. But I think that's partly why in adult world, there's a difference between men and women in careers.
And so we
Apart
do
from
know
the
that
child
there are
thing as
some
well.
very specific gender effects in terms of how boys are. Now, there's also looser evidence that, for example, ADHD is a manifestation of dynamic attention, and that the male gender has required dynamic attention on a more evolutionary aspect. So if you think a little bit about, there's this hypothesis that isn't really correct. I mean, I think it's been somewhat debunked, about hunters and farmers. And these are kind of 2 personality types or cognitive styles. And in a lot of societies, the hunters tend to be men. And if you think about what hunters need to do, they need to integrate a lot of stimuli and need to have a very dynamic attention. So there may actually be some kind of selective pressure on the male gender for having a more dynamic attention. And when you have a kid who's got a dynamic attention that was sort of like evolved to be out in the wilderness where they're tracking things and noticing footprints and noticing broken things over, like broken twigs over there, and they're sort of like on the lookout for danger, and you stick that kid in a classroom for 8 hours, their brain is not really designed for that. Why?
Possibly why men generally like this is a general statement, but why men generally click with gaming more than women? Because women can sit there and focus on a book, which is very sort of linear. You're focusing on one thing. When you're gaming, you're like looking around, you're trying to interact with a lot of things. Like say COD, you need to be aware of all the footsteps and all the sounds and things around you. That makes a lot of sense to me, if you put it in that sort of context.
Is ADHD treated with stimulants? So this is a great question. It can be kind of paradoxical. And I remember before I sort of did my psychiatry training, I was always really confused about using stimulants in kids with ADHD. So here was kind of my understanding, which is that, okay, so if you have a kid who's got ADD or ADHD, their mind is moving really, really, really fast to begin with. They're having 1,000 thoughts a second. They're also fidgety.
Yeah, I do that all the time.
Their arms around a lot, hands around a lot, right? They can't sit still. And what we also know is
literally
that stimulant.
I'm just thinking about it. I've literally just been itching my nose like this. You won't notice it, but if you watch this on YouTube, watch the video back, I've just been doing this all video, or like twiddling my fingers. That's interesting, because I don't notice I do it until people call me out for doing it. My stepmom calls me out for doing it quite a lot. And I do a lot of hand gestures. So I'll be like, you know, this or like that, or, you know. And I tell her that it's not anything I can control. It's just natural movement patterns for me.
Tend to like ramp people up, right? So when I drink caffeine in the
Though
morning,
I do have
my
a very
thoughts start
itchy
to move
nose.
faster. My mind feels more sluggish before caffeine. We also know that, you know, caffeine and other kinds of stimulants will also lead to things like fidgetiness and stuff like that. Like I remember being a medical
Caffeine doesn't bother me.
It
Doesn't really affect me, if I'm honest.
Cocaine or amphetamine, and they'd be like picking at themselves and like itching and like always fidgety, and, you know, they can't sit still. So I was super confused because it seemed like stimulants should make ADHD worse, right? Don't we want to like slow people with ADHD down? So this is what's really fascinating about stimulants, and why we use the ones that we use is because what they actually stimulate is activity in the frontal lobes. So the way that stimulants work in ADHD is our
now I'm
brain
really conscious
has a
about
gas
me
pedal and
itching.
it has a brake.
Ah.
And what the stimulants actually stimulate is
Fuck
the brake.
you, Dr. K.
So they actually act in the frontal lobes and then allow the frontal lobes to strengthen the frontal lobes to inhibit other parts of our brain. So what we're actually stimulating is our inhibitory circuitry. As we stimulate our inhibitory circuitry, the ability for our mind to wander reduces, our impulsivity reduces, even some of our psychomotor activity, like the fidgetiness, will actually go down. So what we're actually stimulating is our brakes or our inhibitory circuitry.
So basically the stimulant is kind of redirecting your attention, I guess. So rather than your trying to think of it in layman's terms. So I can't watch films because I work out what the ending's going to be. It's going to be one of two things by the end of the film. And I will work that out in probably about half an hour of a 2-hour film. So I'm sitting there for an hour and a half going, well, this is going to happen. And I know throughout my life, I've always been right that this is what's going to happen. And people go like, oh, Inception's really clever. I was like, yeah, but I worked it out. Like, they're going to get stuck in a dream within a dream. It's obvious that that's just human nature to try and push the boundaries. So that's what the writers are going to try and do. Or things like the murderer was actually the partner, but she decided that she didn't want to be anything. But that's where the frustrations for me with ADHD come in, is I'm thinking about 2 million things every second. And then it comes out as me not thinking about anything because I've kind of just tired myself out by overworking my thought processes. And I think that would make sense. So like caffeine and things like that kind of narrow it in, make you more focused, but narrows it in, I guess.
ADHD,
so you're not pinging off all around here, you're pinging off around here.
So let's start by understanding what a disability is. Generally speaking, the definition that I like to use for a disability is something that makes your ability to participate in life unequitable. So if we think about disabilities, it's not that this person is good or bad, or that they have more value or less value. It's that life is structured in a particular way that assumes that human beings have a particular ability to do things. So simple example is blindness, right? So our society is structured in a way that relies on sight as being able to function, right? So we'll
Yeah,
have road
because the
signs,
majority
for
are
example. We have
sightseers.
cars, we have traffic lights, we have signs that show what's for sale and what isn't. So we have all of these visual dependent things that our society kind of functions on. And if you can't see, then suddenly you're at a huge disadvantage in participating in.
I think that's the thing that humans don't kind of take into account is we do take a lot for granted. If you think about it, like I'm sitting here broadcasting a video out to you. I can see on my second monitor that I've got chat and I can see the quality of the stream. So I can see where everything is, make sure everything's aligned. I'm watching a video. I've got backlights behind me. I've got backlights behind me there. If I didn't have sight, all of this would be irrelevant. Like literally all of this will be irrelevant apart from his voice and me being able to hear my own voice.
Life
literally
because
would
of the way that society is
be
structured.
pointless having
Is
all the other
ADHD
stuff.
a disability? I'd say it
To
can
me,
be.
as the person that's blind.
For some people, their ADHD is so severe that some of the assumptions that we have in terms of how life happens, people with ADHD are not really able to participate in. And there are a lot of simple examples of this. Like one is that, people showing up on time. So in general, our society is designed with things like appointments, where you show up at a particular time you assume that
before he says what I think he's going to say, I think I'm the opposite because I hate being late. I hate people that turn up late. Like if you say you're going to be there at 6 o'clock, so we're meeting for dinner at 6 o'clock or 8 o'clock, get there for 8 o'clock. I haven't just arranged this like two hours ago. It's been in the diary. It's something that's probably been in the diary for a month. Get there on time. That's what bugs me. Like people who turn up to like football or banter matches late. Sometimes things do turn up. Like if you got kids, the kids start playing up. You can't just leave the kids. That's fine. I get that. But there's friends of mine and people that I interact with throughout like life that they've got no excuse, no reason for it. Like, oh, I just lost track of time. Like, how? Like, if it's in the diary, if you know you're doing something, surely an hour prior, or maybe this is just me, an hour prior, even half an hour prior, depending on how long it takes to get there, you've already worked out how long it's going to take you to get there, how long it's going to take you to get ready for it. So then you start thinking about it. Maybe that's just me. I don't know.
Everyone else shows up at a particular time. Our society is built with things like deadlines, right? So there's a lot of like time-related stuff that is baked into our society, which people with ADHD really, really, really struggle with.
Yeah, I thought you'd say that.
Even if it's a disability, that doesn't mean that it isn't fixable. So we know, for example, that even
to be fair, it might just be me retraining my brain. So like I said, in my calendar, you may not see this, and it's changed, but I don't want to reveal too much. Don't know how to show this without revealing too much. I've got color coded events and things, and different streams I want to do, and different social things I've got, and especially at Christmas, in my calendar, so I can see what's a stream thing, what's a family/friends thing, what's just like a task I need to do. They're all color coded, and they're all like levels of importance to me. So the red ones are things I have to do. So they're either tasks or family and friends events. The second ones are in orange or purple, which is stream stuff or stuff that I need to do that's not that pressing. And then the other stuff is in green. And it may be because I just taught myself that I need to do that and I need to have some form of structure.
People are blind. We have like sort of some audio accessibility options. I don't know that you can drive yet, but maybe you'll be able to. You can certainly walk with a stick. We have like crosswalks that will sort of tell you verbally. They'll use sound instead of just light to let you know that it's safe to.
Oh, in the UK. So this is funny. Actually, thinking about blind people is it proves how stupid kids are and how much rumors and like nonsense spreads around schools and like friendship groups. Because we were always under the belief, until we got to like, let's say 14, 15, that the twiddly thing at the bottom of traffic lights in the UK, there's a little like cone and it spins. And we always thought it was a timer, but it's actually for blind people. So they put their fingers on it, and then when it stops, they're basically like within their fingers tells them that it's safe to cross. We always thought it was a timer to speed the lights up, so we would sit there and just spin this fucking thing, and we all believed it. It's just it's off topic, I know, but like it's quite funny, just how stupid kids are.
Cross, so we can start to make accommodations, and you can make those kinds of accommodations as well.
I don't know if you guys were the same.
By the way, in Dr. K's guide to
and had the same rumor
stuff about how you can sort of use organizational tools, prioritization techniques, things like that. A lot of the things that people with ADHD really struggle with will sort of teach you
exactly
how to do
what
that.
I do.
And what we've actually
it's literally
found,
what I do.
If you look at cognitive behavioral therapy for ADHD, a lot of CBT is sort of like a how to organize and prioritize your life 101 kind of stuff. So I think certainly it can.
I definitely need financial
rise to the level of disability
CBT stuff
because our society doesn't really,
I think,
accommodate people who have struggles to be on time, for example. And at the same time, just like we can have, handicap accessible ramps for wheelchairs, there's a lot of stuff that you can do to compensate for that disability and actually function within life. Why is ADHD overdiagnosed? So in my opinion, ADHD is both the most overdiagnosed and underdiagnosed illness. So why is it overdiagnosed? So the first thing is that remember that ADHD has an environmental component to it. So student-teacher ratios will determine the amount of ADHD that gets diagnosed. So there are some situations in which we'll diagnose it and other situations in which the person actually won't get diagnosed.
Yeah.
So why are we overdiagnosing
Just trying to think of
ADHD?
examples.
A couple of reasons. One is that a lot of the symptoms of ADHD are very relatable. So if we look at, I have difficulty concentrating, I can't sit still, I sometimes forget things, I have difficulty staying organized. The symptoms of ADHD are so much of a universal experience.
I was going to say,
that a lot of people.
I was going to say, so this is what I find. It's when people highlight, I get really annoyed when people highlight the fact that I've got ADHD, because the problems with ADHD are problems that regular people have as well. So there are people who are not on the ADHD or mental disability spectrum who are just rubbish at organizing. They just are fundamentally, maybe because they never got taught it when they were younger. So they'll say they've got ADHD, but they don't. They're just bad at organizing. Or people who struggle with, let's say, prioritizing. So you got 3 tasks to do. They all take different amount of time. They're all different importance. And if someone gets the priorities wrong, that's just their cognitive behavior. So that's the way they've been brought up, I think. It's not necessarily a ADHD thing.
Will think that they have ADHD because who doesn't have difficulty concentrating? I can't sit still in a class for 8 hours and have my mind wander. So since there are so many symptoms which are actually within the normal range of human experience, a lot of people will think that they have ADHD. The second reason that it gets diagnosed a lot is because if you get diagnosed with ADHD and you don't actually have ADHD, it oftentimes works out in your advantage. So if I'm a college student and I want to do well in my classes and I have difficulty focusing, and even if I don't.
So it's, I guess even if you don't officially like medically have ADHD, it may even highlight issues within yourself. It may like make you like self-reflect a little bit more, I guess.
I have ADHD.
Potentially.
If I can get diagnosed with ADHD and get prescribed a stimulant, it will actually make my college life in some ways easier. It'll be easier to study.
I don't like
It'll
using
be easier
medication,
to get good grades.
personally.
So part of the reason that I see a lot of people push for a diagnosis is because in some ways getting diagnosed with ADHD, especially if you don't have it, can lead to advantages. So I think the number one reason we miss diagnoses of ADHD is in the case of a high IQ. So most of the adults that I've diagnosed with ADHD actually have very high IQ. And how do those two things relate?
Me. And I'm not saying I've got a high HQ, but at least going back to the school thing, I'm not stupid. I can work things out. I just get bored. At school, I was just bored. I got put in I hate saying it, the div kid class, and it took everyone else in my class about 4 times as long to work something out. Like, if a very simple question would be laid out for us, and within maybe a minute I would get it, it'll take them 10, 15 minutes. So I'm just sitting there for like 2/3 of the class, just twiddling my thumbs.
Right. Well, generally speaking, the smarter the child is, the more they can compensate for the shortcomings of ADHD. So they develop all of these adaptations or compensation mechanisms that allow them to essentially continue to get good grades. So it's not that I can actually study, but I'm just so friggin' smart that I don't need to study. So sometimes the diagnosis
I
of
wouldn't say
ADHD
that
stays
smart.
incredibly silent as people come up with compensatory mechanisms, and IQ is at the top of the list. Is ADHD curable? Okay, so I'm going to say that the answer is yes and no. We don't think about psychiatric diagnoses as curable. So we think about
I take
curable
offense to that.
diagnoses as things that can be permanently fixed, right? So an infection is a good.
So I take a little bit of offense to that, because that's a loaded question saying that it's instinctively a bad thing to have ADHD. I'm not offense, but there are a lot of benefits. It allows me to problem solve way quicker than a lot of other people, because my brain will take a completely different route and then come back to the answer. And a lot of people will go, let's say there's a spectrum of solving a problem. They'll get to a sticking point and then they will have to force their way through this. I will go off the path and then go there and then just bypass the sticking point that normal brain like functions would go down, because I have like a detached logic path, I guess you could call it. I don't know if that's a term, but people normally go A, B, C. Well, my brain will go, well, why don't we invent an E and go A, E, C, A, B, C, D, or D even. So bypass B and just make D the next step and then go to C. And you end up at C. It's just a different route. And I think that's where people who don't have ADHD or aren't on the spectrum don't get it. So I'll come up with an answer and we'll have the same, like, you could give 2 people a logic problem and we'll both get it correct, but someone will have an issue that they've got to overcome. Right or wrong, or ADHD people will find a way to circumnavigate that and go, well, if it's a problem, why don't we just avoid it? And then they'll find a way to avoid it rather than just force their way through.
Example of an external thing that invades your body and can be sort of like altered. There may be other sources of things that can be, let's say, curable. Like, let's say I do bypass surgery for my heart. I have a clogged artery. I literally attach a new artery. That artery is open, fixes the blood flow, essentially cures the problem. The problem with psychiatric illnesses is that we can't go in and like stick something into your brain that'll fix it. And furthermore, the psychiatric illnesses that we have, especially things like ADHD, have to do with the function of our frontal lobes, right? So it's not like an illness that we can fix. It's the way that our neurons are wired.
I was going to say,
So on the one
psychiatric
hand,
stuff,
it would...
there isn't a pinpoint thing, if that makes sense. So ADHD is different for loads of people. Asperger's is probably those different types of symptoms for people. Autism, the same. Like, some people struggle with certain parts of it. But I think that's the term spectrum, I guess. I guess that would be it. Whereas if you got, I don't know, a disease of some sort, it's a disease that, like, chemically, biologically, they've worked out that they've pinpointed that's what it is, and that's how we get rid of it. ADHD is not like that. Because again, it's environmental. So people will develop different things. So some people will struggle to concentrate, some people will struggle to organize, some people will struggle to prioritize, or will just generally struggle with day-to-day things, but bigger problems they're really good at.
kind of imply that psychiatric illnesses are not curable. On the flip side, what we do know is that with effective treatment, It's essentially as if you no longer have ADHD. So let's go through a couple of things that can quote unquote cure ADHD. The first is that frontal lobes develop until you're about the age of 30 or 32. And we do know that somewhere between 10 and 25% of people will quote unquote grow out of ADHD. And what
I
does
grow
that
out the
mean?
hype a
So
bit.
ADHD is a disorder of basically our frontal lobes. And so as our frontal lobes continue to mature, some of us are kind of right on the cusp where the ADHD is mild enough that frontal lobe maturation basically gets us to cross the line. And then we can essentially live normal lives. But remember, that number is pretty small. It's like basically 10 to 25%. So the next really interesting thing
I'm just thinking
is that
about
if you
this.
look at
Sorry to keep
psychotherapy for
pausing.
ADHD,
These are all human decisions that society has decided as well, bearing in mind. So who's decided, like, once you get to a certain maturity that you've overcome ADHD? Humans have, society has. So why is it necessarily a bad thing that people think differently? Is a question I do have. Like, why does it have to be curable?
versus medication for ADHD, what you tend to find is that if you start someone on medication or psychotherapy, that the outcomes are about the same. So they both help about the same amount. The interesting thing is that within 6 months of stopping medication, the symptoms of ADHD will usually return to baseline.
Yeah, that's why I don't take Ritalin. I've been offered it as an adult, probably about 5 or 6 years ago, and I decided not to, and I did CBT, cognitive behavior therapy, and that's where this. Well, I've always done this for like last 10 or so years, but that's where the logically taking a step. CBT is basically logically taking a step back to understand why you're thinking a certain way and whether it's the right way to be thinking, and working out problems or logic gates and all that sort of thing, logic paths.
But in the case of psychotherapy,
I'm not a fan of
which
medication.
is really interesting, it takes about 2 years for the symptoms to start to return. Which begs the question, if there isn't a stimulant in my mind that kind of gets washed out of my system, what on earth, why doesn't the ADHD come back within 1 year? Shouldn't it come back kind of right away? And that's where if we really look at the mechanisms of psychotherapy,
It's a rewiring
ADHD,
of the brain.
a lot of that stuff is kind of like cognitive training or almost neuronal training, or teaching particular skills that compensate for
exactly.
ADHD, like how to develop a to-do list, how to stay organized, how to set alarms and reminders. And
Calendar,
the cool thing is that if we
alarms.
start to implement some of those things, it essentially removes the ADHD from the equation. Personally, clinically, I've worked with a lot of people who essentially have sustained remission in ADHD. Like they've been 2 years out from treatment and are actually doing like totally fine. Sometimes I'll get a Christmas card from them, or they'll call me around the holidays and they'll be like, "Hey, Dr. K, like just wanted to let you know, Merry Christmas." I'll be like, "How are you? Are your symptoms back?" They're like, "No, actually, I'm totally fine." There do seem to be cases where people can kind of like grow out of it or have a sustainable solution that kind of works for them. So even though we don't really know whether ADHD can be curable or not, what we do know is that there are definitely things that you can implement in your life that will basically cancel it out. The last
Because it's that, just a development point for my sort of journey, let's say, is I used to have a notepad similar to this one here. Just rather than use my phone, I used to have that like a diary of every day I need to do this, 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 and this. But symptom of ADHD is you forget stuff. So I would go places or do things or just generally forget to check it. So that's why we moved it over to my phone. So I'm always on my phone. Well, not always on my phone, but I've always got my phone there. I'm always checking stuff. I'm always like researching on my phone. So that's another development thing that I learned over the years is having a diary. I used to have a little black book with all these girls. No, I didn't have all these girls' numbers in it. It was just a list of stuff like for the week that I had to do. Having the color coding system on my phone is definitely a good thing. Having the alarms on my phone is obviously a good thing. So literally I can't ignore it. And basically it means the things I struggle to think about, I now no longer have to think about. I just put it in my phone.
thing is that we also know that there are ways to strengthen the frontal lobes. So meditation is a good example of something that strengthens the frontal lobes that has more of a, let's say, permanent effect. So if you meditate for a long period of time, your frontal lobes will strengthen. If you continue to meditate every day, they'll be kind of generally stronger, but there's some amount of almost permanent effect from it. So there are, I would say, permanent gains to be made with ADHD treatment, even if we can't quite call it a cure. How can you prevent ADHD? What a fascinating question. So what I'm going to do now is actually depart a little bit from science. So it is my belief that if you isolate the different problems that ADHD has, like if you look at the neuroscience deficiencies, let's say impulsivity, let's say the inability to do delayed gratification, it is my belief, and I'm running a trial of sorts on this as we speak, that you can actually teach a child particular skills that will compensate for their neuroscience deficiencies. And I'll give you all just a simple example. So one example is that people with ADHD have difficulty delaying gratification, okay? So what that sort of means is that, like, there's a very famous kind of test called the marshmallow test, where you can offer a child 1 marshmallow now or 2 marshmallows in 5 or 10 minutes.
So that's a proven point, actually. This setup, I didn't need to do any of this. I've got, well, technically, at the moment, before I turn this, I've got a 130 quid mic and a 90 quid mic. I've got probably a $3,000 piece or $2,500 PC. I don't need that. I just want it. That's partly reserved gratification. So in my head, I was like, oh, if I have a better setup and a better mic and a better camera, so I've got a 4K 60 FPS camera, don't really need it, to be honest, because I don't even stream in 4K. But in my head, that's how I get gratification. So I don't have to wait till I become this big YouTuber or big streamer. I just wanted the setup. I just wanted to buy this stuff. And I probably didn't need to, but it gives me satisfaction. I think that's why I struggle with my weight. I'm not very good at going, well, if I get down to a certain weight, then I can treat myself to a bar of chocolate or, I don't know, a cake, let's say. I just go, well, I'll eat the cake now and then I'll lose weight after. And then the weight stuff doesn't come. The stuff that I have to do after doesn't happen. That's where I think he's right. I think that's where he's very accurate.
It's the simple idea that if I make a sacrifice today, I can get more tomorrow that people with ADHD really struggle with. So normal kids will be able to wait 5 minutes, 10 minutes. That also has to do to some degree with your personality structure, your degree of conscientiousness. But ADHD kids are notorious at getting instant gratification and being vulnerable to instant gratification. So I was playing a game with someone that I care about deeply recently, and I was playing this game with them intentionally. And the game is this card game called Jaipur. And it's a really lovely board game. And a key part of the board game, it's a trading game where you accumulate cards. But the key thing is that the more cards you sell, the more items you sell at one time, you get like stackable bonuses. So you get sort of like a multiplier on the points that you score depending on, you know, how long you wait to sell stuff. So if I sell 1 of an item, I'll get 1.0. If I sell 2 of an item, I'll get 1.0. If I sell 3 of an item, I'll get 1.2. If I sell 4 of an item, I'll get 1.4.
Good analogy,
actually.
If
I sell 5 of an item, I'll get 1.6 or 1.8. So it's my belief that this game actually trains the brain to learn the skill of delayed gratification. That as I was working with this one particular person, I started playing the game with them, and then originally they would see like a shiny gem and they'd sell it right away because they wanted the points. And over the course of teaching them this game, what we've actually learned is that they've started to delay their gratification.
Yeah, that's cool.
And not only have they delayed their gratification within the game, I've noticed a change in terms of their ability to delay gratification in other parts of their life. So I am starting to really believe that what you can really do is
this is something I'm going to start working on, I think. I'm not going to stop doing streaming and YouTube and stuff, but I need to probably put a little bit more effort into my streams, a bit more effort into my videos. Don't just put the video out. I'm going to spend a little bit more time to make it better quality, I think, thinking about it. It's a process. It's going to take a while, but hopefully that will come. Hopefully you guys will like it and see the difference. But it's a good point. It's not doing the Asmund Gold effect, let's say, is uploading 2 videos a day. They're not great quality. He's got a good personality. He's got a big following, but they're not great quality. Then you got like Michelle Carre or Mr. Beast. I don't like Mr. Beast's videos, but he does put a lot of effort and time into the videos. Michelle Carre does these challenge accepted things. So she'll bring out one video every 6 months, or Michael Reeves or William Osman. They'll do one video every 3 months or 6 months, but they'll be really well thought out and planned. I think that's what I need to do more. As someone who's got ADHD, I think that's what I need to, not necessarily do more, but just be cognitively aware that that's what I need to kind of plan out a bit better.
Understand all of the neuroscience deficits of ADHD and start to actually target and train those specific skills. So if you've got a kid who's kind of on that ADHD path, and you take some of these principles from like CBT of ADHD and actually start to teach them to the child, teach the child to meditate, teach the child to be less impulsive, you can potentially train some of those skills. Now, is this scientifically valid? Not really, but this is something that I'm really starting to believe is possible based on this one experiment that I happen to be running. Okay, last question is, how can ADHD affect your performance in school? The short answer is that ADHD can really mess with your school performance. And, I don't know how to say this, but like basically school is not designed for the ADHD brain. School is designed for the neurotypical brain. So school is designed under a couple of assumptions. One is that students have a certain level of organization. Second is that students have a certain amount of ability to prioritize. Students have a certain amount of impulse control. So I'll give you all a simple example. So let's look at the last thing is schools have a certain amount of attentional assumptions on the part of their students. So let's tunnel down into that for a second. If you think about school has 2 ways that we learn, right? You sit in a class and the teacher talks to you. Way number 1. Second thing is homework. And the idea is that homework
I never understood
is a reinforcement of what you learned in school, right? So there's this assumption that we teach things in class.
I never understood it,
get
personally.
reinforced and solidified through homework. Now that school system is designed on the assumption that when there is a teacher in class who is teaching for 50 minutes, that the student will learn something. Obviously, right? That's why we have classes. But imagine what happens if, for example, you're a student in that class. Let's say you're doing a Zoom lecture and your internet connection goes out. Let's say every 5 minutes, your internet connection disappears for 5 minutes. So you only get 50% of what the teacher teaches. Now, what kind of disadvantage do you think that person would have? Because the disadvantage that they face is greater than just what they missed, right? Because now when they get assigned homework, they actually have to teach themselves all of the gaps.
I was going to say, so let's say they miss 50% in the lesson. And now that 50% they're missing, when they go home, they don't have that teacher there to give them the 50%. So they're now actually losing 75% because it's obviously 100% and 100% of like home and school. Yeah, that's true. So they're now actually 75% behind when they come back into school the next day.
So whereas homework may take a 1 hour for a regular student, for the kid with ADHD, not only do they have to go and make up, let's say, the 30 minutes of class that they missed out on, but they have to like do some amount of catch-up learning, an additional 30 minutes to 1 hour to complete the 1 hour of homework. So whereas one student can accomplish something within 2 hours, 1 hour of class and 1 hour of homework, the kid with ADHD has to have 1 hour of homework, 1 hour, half an hour of like patching up class, and an additional half an hour of like sort of fixing everything so that they can do the homework. So the ADHD kid, it costs them 3 hours instead of 2. And we're not even considering for a moment that the ADHD kid's mind is wandering while they're doing homework, which is also the case. So now when you really think about it, what takes 2 hours for a neurotypical kid will take 4 hours for an ADHD kid. And why is that? It's because the ADHD mind wanders so much in class that half of the class is wasted on them. So I think we oftentimes don't really acknowledge or realize how devastating ADHD can be for a child. What it essentially means is that you can't participate in school the way that school is designed.
Yeah, I suppose, like, if you think about it, if that's just a day or like a class, imagine that over the course of how long are you at school for? Let's say 10 years, 15 years, let's say, if you go to university. So you're now 75% behind, but over 15 years, not just one class, potentially. When you look at it like that, that's kind of scary. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not quite to that extreme, I don't think, but it's quite a scary thought that just having someone who's essentially, on the face of it, it looks like, oh, they're 50% behind because they didn't understand half of a class. But actually, yeah, it snowballs. It can really affect people.
And so what ADHD kids have to do is work twice as hard or come up with all of these compensatory mechanisms to try to fix what they're missing from school. And what's so devastating about this, and there's so much research, that if you look at kids with ADHD, there's a 70% chance.
I think this is why people that are on the spectrum are quite good at problem solving. Because unintentionally or subconsciously, we've had to work out additional problems that other people don't have.
That they will develop depression later in life, a mood disorder. And that's absolutely a causative effect. So 3% of kids who have major depressive disorder will grow up to have ADHD. But 70% of kids who have ADHD will grow up to have major depressive disorder. And why is that? It's because life is designed for a neurotypical kid. And when
life
you
is
go
hard.
through life as a neuroatypical
life
kid,
isn't designed correctly for people like us. It's really
all
hard.
you end up with is, man, I am so incompetent. What is wrong with me? How are these kids able to do this? I know I'm just as smart as them, but these kids are getting A's and I'm struggling with C's. So why does it?
I never had that problem. I never thought. I've always said this. I'm not dumb. I just do stupid things. And I think it's a quote. It seems to be a quote of my adult life, at least. Is I'm not stupid. I know what I'm doing is wrong, but I still decide that that's what I want to do.
Take them 1 hour to do homework, and it takes me 3 hours to do homework. And outside of an
Partly I'm a risk
answer or
taker
an
as well.
explanation that is given to those kids, they internalize it as shame, right? Because if no one explains it to me, what's the most natural conclusion? I'm an idiot. I'm incompetent. I'm lazy. I'm undisciplined. As they internalize those things, it actually manifests as depression later in life. It's so hard. The mind tells you not today, not.
Interesting. I agree with pretty much all the things he said. They all logically make sense. But unfortunately, the real world doesn't work like that. The real world doesn't really want to give you a helping hand, because then you'll become successful, and then the people who are successful will have competition. That's the problem. And whether people do it intentionally or not, the world is not fair to people who think differently. But, so just a quick one, just to wrap this up before we start playing Talus. Next year, I'm going to be doing some more charity stuff. I don't know what charity it's going to be. I think it's going to be a mental health charity. I think it's logically, probably with the year I've had, probably the most logical and makes more sense. But yeah, I'll let you guys know in the new year. Just join the Discord if you want to get involved with stuff, and I'll update you on there and on Twitter and things. And if you're watching this on YouTube, hope you like the video. It's a bit more of a open book into my life, so you guys get to know a bit more about me. But yeah, I've struggled with ADHD all my life. I've been bullied as a kid and criticized by a lot of people, friends and family, like very close people to me, criticize me. And the last 5 years, I've just got to the point where I just don't give a shit. I've literally like, this is who I am. I'm doing my best. Like, if you don't like it, then just do one. And that's what it gets to. And I think that's why he was saying that 75% of people with learning disabilities end up with depression. Because it's a mixture of two things. Either they feel sorry for themselves and like, why me? Why am I so far behind? And then they beat themselves up over it. Or it's the other, which is what I've had, especially in my adult life, is people beating you up, saying, why can't you just work this out for yourself? Sort of thing. Anyway, I hope you like the videos. And yeah, hopefully it'll be a good new year.